The rope snapped taut, then went slack as Sheriff Kieran Holt's bullet severed it clean through. The condemned man dropped to his knees on the gallows platform, gasping like a landed fish, while the crowd below erupted in confused shouts. "Stand down, Ezekiel." Holt's voice boomed across Millbrook's town square, his smoking Colt .45 trained on the hangman. "That man ain't dying today." Ezekiel Crane, the town's executioner for 15 years, stepped back from his lever with trembling hands. "Sheriff, you can't. The court ordered." The court was lied to. Holt's boots echoed on the wooden steps as he climbed toward the platform. The man he'd saved Arias Whitmore knelt there still, the severed noose around his neck like a grotesque necklace. "This man didn't kill Judge Pemberton. I got proof." Mayor Cornelius Ashford pushed through the angry crowd, his face purple with rage. "Holt, you've lost your damn mind. That half-breed murdered our judge in cold blood." The racial slur hit the air like a slap. Darius Whitmore was indeed half Cherokee, half Irish, a fact that had sealed his fate in most minds before the trial even began. But Holt had spent 3 sleepless nights following leads the court had ignored, and what he'd discovered made his blood run cold. "The real killer's standing right there in that crowd," Holt announced, scanning the faces below. His eyes found who he was looking for, a woman in a dark blue dress, trying to edge toward the back. Violet Thorne, the judge's own secretary. The crowd turned as one, following his gaze. Violet froze like a deer in lamplight, her carefully composed mask slipping for just an instant. It was enough. "You're insane," she called out, but her voice cracked. "I was in the church that evening." "Ask Reverend Hayes is conveniently out of town." Holt cut her off. "But I found the real interesting thing in Judge Pemberton's private study. Love letters, Miss Thorne. Dozens of 'em, seems you. And the good judge had quite the arrangement going." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Violet's face went white as fresh snow. "Until he threatened to leave his wife for you, and you realized what that would mean for your reputation in this God-fearing town." Holt's voice carried to every corner of the square. "So you killed him, made it look like robbery? Happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Sheriff," Mayor Ashford's voice cut through the tension. "Even if this wild tale has merit, we got procedures, legal processes. You can't what?" A new voice joined the fray. All eyes turned to see Judge Pemberton's widow, Magnolia, pushing through the crowd. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but her presence commanded attention. "Can't prevent the murder of an innocent man?" She climbed the gallows steps with dignity that belied her grief. "I found more than love letters in my husband's study, Sheriff. I found bank receipts. Miss Thorne had been embezzling from the court funds. My husband discovered it." The crowd's mood shifted like wind before a storm. Violet Thorne took another step backward, her escape route narrowing. "Wait. This is madness," she whispered. But her protest sounded hollow, even to her own ears. "That's..." When Mayor Ashford smiled, a cold, calculating expression that made Holt's instincts scream danger. "Well then," Ashford announced loudly, "seems we got ourselves a new criminal to deal with. But seeing as how we're all gathered here already..." He gestured to the crowd with theatrical flair. "Might as well put this platform to good use." Crowd's bloodlust shifted like a hunting pack catching a new scent. Sheriff Holt watched in growing horror as neighbors who'd shared Sunday dinners began shouting for Violet Thorne's immediate execution. "String her up," someone yelled from the back. "Murderess," cried another. "No." Holt stepped between the mob and Violet, who had gone chalk white. "There will be no more hangings today. Miss Thorne will get a fair trial, just like... "The fair trial," you interrupted. Mayor Ashford's voice dripped with mock concern. "Sheriff, you've shown us that our legal system is ... flexible. Why shouldn't we be equally adaptable?" The crowd roared approval. Holt felt the situation spinning beyond his control when a clear, strong voice cut through the chaos. "Guess that's not how justice works." Everyone turned to see a young woman pushing through the crowd with determined strides. She was perhaps 25, with auburn hair that caught the afternoon sun like copper wire, green eyes that blazed with intelligence. In fury, Her simple blue dress marked her as working class, but she carried herself like royalty. "And who might you be, miss?" Mayor Ashford asked with condescending politeness. "Callista Brennan. Teach at the schoolhouse." She climbed the gallows steps. With the same fearlessness she'd shown facing down unruly children. "And I won't stand by while this town abandons every principle it claims to hold dear." "Pretty words from a pretty girl," Ashford replied, his tone turning oily. "But this is men's business, sweetheart." The patronizing endearment was a mistake. Callista's eyes narrowed to emerald slits. Men's business? Was it men's business when half these men were too drunk to serve on the jury that condemned an innocent? Man, was it men's business when you railroaded Darius through a trial that lasted all of 3 hours? Sheriff Holt found himself staring at this fierce young woman with something approaching awe. In a town where most folks kept their heads down and their opinions to themselves, Callista Brennan stood like a lighthouse in a storm. "Miss Brennan raises valid points," he said, finding his voice again. "We need to follow proper procedures." Procedures. Mayor Ashford laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sheriff, I'm afraid your recent actions have shown a disturbing disregard for authority. Perhaps it's time this town considered new leadership." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Holt's hand instinctively moved toward his gun, but he caught himself. Violence would only prove Ashford's point. "You know what I think?" Callista said suddenly, her voice carrying a dangerous sweetness. "I think this whole mess is mighty convenient for some folks. Quick execution, no questions asked. Case closed. Makes a person wonder what else might get swept under the rug." Her gaze swept the crowd, lingering on certain faces. Several prominent citizens shifted uncomfortably. "What are you implying, Miss Brennan?" Judge Pemberton's widow, Magnolia, asked. "Quietly, I'm not implying anything, Mrs. Pemberton. I'm stating facts. Your husband was investigating more than just embezzlement. He'd been asking questions about the town's finances, about certain land deals, about why the railroad decided to bypass Millbrook when we were promised it would come right through." The crowd's energy shifted again, confusion replacing bloodlust. Mayor Ashford's face darkened. "Careful, schoolteacher," he said softly. "Idle gossip can be dangerous." "Good thing I don't trade in gossip," Callista replied. She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a leather journal. "I trade in facts." Judge Pemberton left quite a few interesting facts in his private papers. Sheriff Holt stared at her. "How did you?" "Mrs. Pemberton asked me to help sort through her husband's study," Callista explained. "Being is how I can read and write better than most folks in town. We found all sorts of fascinating documents." Magnolia Pemberton nodded slowly. "My husband suspected corruption, Sheriff. Was building a case that died with him." Mayor Ashford said coldly. "How convenient." "Not quite." Callista smiled, holding up the journal. "See, judges tend to keep detailed records." And Judge Pemberton was very thorough. The mayor's eyes fixed on that leather journal like it was a coiled rattlesnake. "I'm sure whatever romantic fantasies the good judge wrote down." "Oh, these aren't romantic fantasies," Callista interrupted. "These are financial records. Names, dates, amounts. Very specific amounts." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Sheriff Holt could practically see the gears turning in every head present. If Judge Pemberton had discovered corruption, I think, Callista continued pleasantly, that we should postpone any more executions until we can sort all this out properly. Don't you agree, Mayor Ashford? But when everyone turned to look at the mayor, he was gone, vanished into the crowd. Like morning mist. "Find him." Sheriff Holt's voice cracked like a whip across the town square. Half the crowd scattered like startled chickens, while the other half stood gawking as if they'd never seen their mayor disappear before. Callista Brennan tucked Judge Pemberton's journal safely back into her dress pocket. "He won't get far. Man like Ashford doesn't survive in the wilderness. He's soft, used to having other people do his dirty work." Holt started to respond when gunshots rang out from the direction of the stables. The remaining crowd dropped too. The ground instinctively, mothers shielding children, men reaching for weapons they'd left at home. "Stay here," Holt ordered, but Callista was already moving. Hiking up her skirts to run alongside him toward the sound of trouble, they found chaos at Morrison's livery. Horses reared and whinnied in terror, while old Henry Morrison lay groaning. In the dirt, blood seeping from a head wound, Mayor Ashford's prized black stallion was gone from its stall. Henry. Callista dropped to her knees beside the injured man. What happened? Ashford Morrison gasped, accepting the water she offered. Came running in like the devil himself was chasing him. Demanded midnight. When I said he had to pay first. He gestured weakly at his bleeding scalp. Sheriff Holt examined the empty stall. Fresh manure. Still warm. How long ago? 5 minutes? Maybe less. Sheriff. That horse of his is fast, but midnights also mean as a sidewinder. Ashford ain't much of a rider on his best day. Which direction? Holt was already mentally cataloging his pursuit options. North Road toward the Clearwater Pass. Callista stood, brushing dirt from her dress. He's heading for the railroad junction. At Clearwater? There's a westbound train every Tuesday at 4 o'clock. Holt checked his pocket watch. 3:30. Damn, if he makes that train. ... He won't, Callista said with quiet certainty. How can you be so sure? Instead of answering directly, she walked to the back of the stable and whistled sharply. A magnificent chestnut mare emerged from the shadows, sleek, powerful, and clearly built for speed. Because Callista said, running her hand along the horse's neck, Rosalind here is faster than any stallion Ashford ever owned, and unlike the mayor, I actually know how to ride. Henry Morrison grinned, despite his injury. That's the school teacher's horse, Sheriff. Used to race him down in Kentucky before she came here. Rosalind ain't never been beat. Holt stared at this surprising woman. Miss Brennan, I appreciate the offer, but chasing down dangerous fugitives isn't exactly what women's work. Her eyes flashed. Sheriff, that man has been stealing from this town for years. He's got documents in his possession that could clear Darius Whitmore's name completely, and God knows what else. You want to let him escape because you're worried about propriety? She had a point. Holt's own horse was solid, but not particularly fast, and every second counted if they wanted to catch Ashford before he reached Clearwater. Can you handle a gun? He asked. In response, Callista reached into her saddlebags and pulled out a Winchester rifle that looked well-maintained and frequently used. I can handle myself, Sheriff. All right, then. He made his decision, but we do this my way. Ashford's desperate, and desperate men do stupid things. They mounted quickly. As they prepared to ride out, Magnolia Pemberton approached, her face etched with worry. Sheriff, be careful. If my husband was right about the scope of this corruption, Ashford has a lot to lose. Men like that. They don't surrender quietly. We'll bring him back, ma'am, Holt promised. Alive, preferably, Callista added dryly. Dead men can't testify. They spurred their horses north, racing against time and the approaching train whistle that would carry a murderer beyond their reach. The road to Clearwater. Pass wound through dense pine forests and rocky outcroppings, perfect terrain for an ambush. Holt found himself stealing glances at his unlikely partner, marveling at how she handled her horse with the skill of someone born to the saddle. Tell me about this corruption you mentioned, he called over the thunder of hooves. Later, called back. Right now, we've got bigger problems. She was pointing ahead, where fresh horse tracks in the mud suddenly veered off the main road into the thick woods. Ashford had abandoned his direct route to Clearwater, choosing instead the treacherous mountain trails that snaked through Devil's Canyon. He's either desperate or clever, Holt observed as they slowed to follow the tracks. Or both, Callista replied grimly. And that makes him twice as dangerous. The mountain trail narrowed to barely more than a deer path, forcing them to ride single file through towering pines that blocked most of the afternoon sun. Sheriff Holt led, his hand resting on his gun, but while his eyes scanned for signs of ambush. This doesn't make sense, Callista murmured from behind him. Ashford's heading deeper into the mountains, away from any escape route. Unless he's not trying to escape, Holt realized with growing dread. Unless he's leading us somewhere specific. The tracks ahead suddenly multiplied, not just Ashford's horse, but at least 3 others. Fresh tracks, made within the last hour. Had help waiting, Holt said, reining in his horse. This was planned. Or he's not working alone, Callista suggested. Sheriff, what if the corruption goes deeper than just embezzlement? What if the rifle shot split the mountain air like thunder? Holt's hat flew off his head. A neat hole punched through the crown. Both horses reared in alarm. Get down, Holt shouted, diving from his saddle and pulling Callista with him behind a fallen log. A second shot splintered bark inches from where they'd been sitting. Mayor Ashford, Holt called out. This doesn't have to end badly. Come down and we'll talk. A harsh laughter echoed from the rocks above. Talk? Like you talked before shooting the rope at my execution? You've caused enough trouble, Sheriff. Ah! Execution, Callista whispered. What's he talking about? But Holt was staring up at the rocky outcropping where he'd glimpsed movement. That voice hadn't been alone. There were at least 2 men up there, maybe 3. Miss Brennan, he said quietly, I need you to work your way around to the left. Stay low. Use the trees for cover. What are you planning? To keep them talking? While you get a better angle with that Winchester. She nodded, checking her rifle's action with practiced efficiency. Give me 5 minutes. As she slipped away through the undergrowth, moving with surprising stealth for a schoolteacher, Holt called out again, Ashford, you're cornered. There's no way off this mountain except past me. Wrong, Sheriff. The mayor's voice was slurred with panic and something else alcohol, Holt realized. The man had been drinking, which made him even more unpredictable. See? I know these mountains better than you think. Been using them for years. Using them for what? None of your damn business. But another voice answered, a voice that made Holt's blood run cold. Using them to move stolen goods, sheriff cattle mostly. Some silver from the mines over in Cedar Ridge, whatever folks wouldn't miss right away. Judge Pemberton stepped into view on the rocky ledge, very much alive, very much pointing a rifle at Holt's position. Hello, Kieran, the supposedly dead judge continued pleasantly. Surprised to see me? Holt's mind raced, trying to process this impossible development, but ... the body ... Poor drifter who had the misfortune to resemble me, Pemberton explained, amazing what a little creative mortuary work can accomplish. My dear wife was so grief-stricken she barely looked at the corpse. You let your own wife believe you were dead? Magnolia was becoming ... inconvenient. Too many questions about my late nights, my business trips. She was getting suspicious. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. So you staged your own murder. Framed Darius Whitmore because he was an easy target, and Violet Thorne, supposed to keep her mouth shut about our affair, when she started demanding I leave Magnolia for her. Well, loose ends needed too. Be tied up, you son of a bitch, Holt breathed. Oh no. Sheriff, no need for name-calling. This is just business. You understand business, don't you? From somewhere in the trees came the sharp crack of Callista's Winchester. One of the hidden riflemen cursed and crashed through the underbrush. Damn, schoolteacher! Ashford's voice was high with panic now. You said she was harmless. Plans change, Pemberton replied calmly. But the outcome remains the same. You're going to die up here, Sheriff. Along with your lady friend. Mountain accidents happen all the time, and then what? Holt called out, trying to keep them talking while Callista maneuvered. You just go back to your old life. Your wife already knows too much. The whole town heard about your journal, your investigation into corruption. My journal? Pemberton laughed. You mean the one I wrote myself? Full of accusations against poor Mayor Ashford here? Amazing how evidence can point in any direction you want it to. The cold calculation in the man's voice made Holt realize. He was dealing with someone far more dangerous than a simple embezzler or even a murderer. This was a man who played chess with human lives. But Callista Brennan, it seemed, was very good at chess herself. The second rifle shot came from an unexpected angle, not from Callista's position, but from directly behind the outlaws. Judge Pemberton stumbled backward, his weapon clattering down the rocky slope as he clutched a bleeding shoulder. Drop your guns, a familiar voice commanded. Now, Sheriff Holt couldn't believe his eyes as Darius Whitmore emerged from behind. A boulder. The Winchester that had nearly executed him now trained steadily on the corrupt officials who'd tried to murder him. Darius. How did you follow you from town? The half-Cherokee man replied, never taking his eyes off his targets. Figured after what you did for me, least I could do was return the favor. Mayor Ashford's rifle wavered in his hands. You're supposed to be dead? A lot of people supposed to be dead today, Darius observed dryly. Seems to be going around. Callista appeared from the trees on the left, her own weapon covering the remaining hidden gunman who'd emerged with his hands raised. Sheriff, you all right? Better than all right, Holt replied, moving up the slope with his Colt drawn. Judge Pemberton, you're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, theft. You can't prove anything. From his shoulder wound. My word against yours. Who do you think people will believe? Maybe they'll believe the evidence, Callista said, producing not just the leather journal but a thick bundle of documents from her saddlebags. See, while you boys were having your shooting match, I had a little chat with your wife, Judge. Turns out Magnolia suspected you were alive all along. Pemberton's face went white. That's impossible, is it? Woman lives with a man for 15 years. She knows his habits, his handwriting, his way of thinking. Callista smiled coldly. She's been collecting evidence against you for months, waiting for the right moment to act. Lying bitch, Ashford snarled. Just like all women, can't be trusted too. The mayor's words were cut off as Darius Whitmore's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling in the dirt. Apologize, Darius said quietly to the lady. Ashford spat blood and glared up at him. I ain't apologizing to no half-breeds, whore. This time it was Sheriff Holt who moved, his boot connecting with the mayor's ribs hard enough to lift him. Off the ground, the lady's a schoolteacher and a citizen of this town, Holt said evenly. Damn, she's got more honor in her little finger than you got in your whole worthless body. Callista looked startled by the violence of his defense. Then something warm and appreciative flickered in her green eyes. Thank you, Sheriff, but I can fight my own battles. Never doubted it for a second, Miss Brennan. The sound of approaching horses echoed through the canyon. Posse from town, led by Magnolia Pemberton herself, emerged from the trail below. Kieran? She called up. Did you get them? Got 'em all, Mrs. Pemberton? He called back. Including your husband? The woman's shoulders sagged with what might have been relief. Good, that means I can finally mourn him properly. As they secured the prisoners and prepared for the ride back to Millbrook, Darius Whitmore approached Sheriff Holt with something approaching awkwardness. Sheriff, I owe you my life. Don't know how to repay that kind of debt. No debt, Holt replied firmly. Just justice. Long overdue, but justice all the same. What happens now? Holt looked around at the aftermath of their mountain showdown. Corrupt. Officials in custody, evidence of years of theft and murder secured, an innocent man cleared of all charges. Now we go home, he said. We start cleaning up the mess these bastards made of our town. Our town, Darius asked quietly. Your town too, if you want it to be. There's going to be some changes in Millbrook, starting with how we treat our neighbors. For the first time since Holt had known him, Darius Whitmore smiled, but it was Callista who spoke the words that would echo in Holt's memory for years to come. Sharif, she said, swinging gracefully back into her saddle, I think this is the beginning of something important. For all of us, as they started the long ride back to town. Sheriff Kieran Holt found himself hoping she was right. The trial of Judge Pemberton, Mayor Ashford, and their accomplices became the most talked about event in Millbrook's history. People traveled from neighboring towns to witness justice, served in the very courthouse where corruption had festered for years. Sheriff Holt stood at the back of the packed courtroom, watching as the visiting judge from the territorial capital questioned witness after witness. Magnolia Pemberton testified with quiet dignity about her husband's deception. Violet Thorne, granted immunity in exchange for her testimony, revealed the extent of the embezzlement scheme. Even old Henry Morrison, his head still bandaged, described the mayor's violent escape attempt, but it was Callista Brennan who delivered the most damning testimony. Judge Pemberton kept meticulous records. She explained to the rapt courtroom, holding up ledger after ledger. Every stolen cow, every bribe paid, every official silenced. He documented it all, probably as insurance. Against his partners? And how did you come to possess these documents? The visiting judge asked. Mrs. Pemberton asked for my help sorting through her husband's papers after his supposed death. We found a hidden safe behind a false wall in his study. The real question is why a judge would need to hide his personal papers unless those papers contained evidence of criminal activity. The defense attorney, a nervous man from the territorial capital who clearly wished he was anywhere else, made one last desperate attempt. Your Honor, my clients maintain that they were investigating this corruption, not participating in it. These documents could just as easily be evidence they were gathering against the real criminals. Callista smiled pleasantly. Then perhaps the defense can explain why Judge Pemberton's investigation includes detailed notes on how to forge territorial land grants, or why Mayor Ashford's personal bank account contains deposits that exactly match the amounts reported. Stolen from the town treasury, the defense attorney sat down heavily, defeat written across his face. When the verdicts were announced guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted in cheers. Judge Pemberton received 15 years in territorial prison. Mayor Ashford got 12. Their accomplices received sentences ranging from 5 to 10 years. Outside on the courthouse steps, Sheriff Holt found himself surrounded by townspeople, eager to shake his hand and thank him for his courage. "Sheriff," called out Mrs. Patterson from the general store. "The town council's meeting tonight to discuss replacing Mayor Ashford. Your name's been mentioned for the position." Holt held up his hands diplomatically. "Appreciate the confidence, Mrs. Patterson, but I'm a lawman, not a politician. You folks need someone who understands governance, not just gunfighting." "What about Miss Brennan?" suggested Dr. Morrison, Henry's brother. "She's educated, honest, and proved herself during this whole mess." "A woman mayor?" Old Pete Henley scoffed. "That's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard." The comment fell into sudden silence as every eye turned to Callista, who had just emerged from the courthouse. She'd been inside collecting the evidence documents for safekeeping, and Holt noticed she'd taken special care with her appearance today, her best dress. Her auburn hair pinned up elegantly, her green eyes bright with purpose. "Mr. Henley," she said pleasantly, "with respect to your advanced years and traditional views, I'd like to point out that this ridiculous woman is the one who uncovered the corruption, gathered the evidence, and helped capture the criminals who've been stealing from your town for years. Perhaps it's time to consider that competence matters more than gender." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Henley looked around and realized he was alone in his objection. "Besides," Callista continued with a slight smile, "I'm not interested in being mayor. I have other plans." Sheriff Holt felt a stab of disappointment, though he tried to hide it. "Other plans?" "I've been offered a position with the Territorial Education Department. Traveling to establish schools in new settlements, it's important work." "It is," Holt agreed, forcing enthusiasm into his voice. "The territory needs good teachers." "Yes, it does." Her eyes met his directly. "But it also needs good sheriffs, good men who aren't afraid to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." Something in her tone made his pulse quicken. "Miss Brennan, Callista," she corrected softly. "Callista." He liked the way her name felt in his mouth. "About your position with the territory. Have you accepted it yet?" "Not yet. I'm waiting to see if something more appealing presents itself." The crowd around them seemed to fade away as they looked at each other. Sheriff Holt had faced down armed outlaws without breaking a sweat, but one schoolteacher's smile made his hands tremble. "I was wondering," he said carefully, "if you might consider staying in Millbrook. We'll need a new mayor, and despite what you said, I think you'd be perfect for the job." "Is that the only reason you want me to stay, Sheriff?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. Around them, he could hear people whispering and chuckling, but he found he didn't care about the audience. "No," he said, "honestly, it's not. And perhaps you'd better tell me what the other reasons are." 3 months later, Sheriff Kieran Holt stood at the altar of Millbrook's newly rebuilt church, adjusting his collar nervously while Reverend Hayes droned on about the sanctity of marriage. The pews were packed with every resident of the town, plus visitors from 3 neighboring settlements who'd heard about the sheriff's wedding. Darius Whitmore, serving as best man, leaned over and whispered, "You sure about this? Last chance?" "To run?" Holt grinned. "I'm not running anywhere." The church doors opened, and conversation ceased as Callista Brennan appeared in a simple but elegant white dress. her auburn hair crowned with wildflowers picked that morning from the meadow where Holt had first kissed her. She walked down the aisle alone, having no family present, but every face she passed was friendly. Millbrook had embraced her completely after the corruption trials. Mrs. Magnolia Pemberton, now serving as the town's interim mayor, rose from her front row seat to serve as matron of honor. The widow had thrown herself into civic duty with remarkable energy, as if making up for years of willful blindness about her husband's activities. Dearly beloved Reverend Hayes began, "We are gathered here today to join these two remarkable individuals in holy matrimony. ... But Holt wasn't listening to the ceremony. He was lost in Callista's green eyes, remembering the conversation that had led them to this moment. I turned down the territorial education position she'd told him 3 weeks after the trial, finding him in his office late one evening. You did what? Callista, that was an incredible opportunity, it was. I realized I'd rather help build something here in Millbrook than constantly be moving from place to place." She'd moved closer to his desk, close enough that he could smell the lilac soap she used. "Besides, a certain sheriff made me some compelling arguments about why I should stay. Such as, well, he pointed out that the town needs someone to oversee the school rebuilding project, someone to help implement new civic policies to prevent future corruption, and someone to work with him to make sure justice is fair for everyone, regardless of their background or bloodline." All very practical reasons, he'd agreed, standing up from behind his desk. Very practical, she'd confirmed, stepping closer still. "Though I have to admit there was one argument that convinced me more than all the others combined, which was when he told me he was falling in love with me. Do you, Kieran, take Callista to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Hayes's voice brought him back to the present. "I do," Holt said firmly. "And do you, Callista, take Kieran to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she replied, her voice clear and strong. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." The kiss was gentle, proper for a church wedding, but it promised much more for later. The congregation erupted in cheers and applause as they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife Holt caught sight of several familiar faces. Violet Thorne, who'd decided to stay in Millbrook and was now teaching alongside Callista at the rebuilt school. Henry Morrison, fully recovered from his injuries and beaming with pride. Even some of the former outlaws' families, who'd been welcomed back into the community after proving their own innocence. Outside the church, the celebration continued with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the territory. But eventually, as the sun set behind the mountains, the newlyweds found themselves alone on the front porch of their new home, the house that had belonged to Judge Pemberton, purchased from his widow and thoroughly cleaned of any traces of its former owner. "So," Callista said, settling into the porch swing beside her husband, "what do you think our first year of marriage will bring?" Holt considered the question. "Well, the town's growing. We'll probably need a deputy soon. The school enrollment has doubled since word got out about our new teacher. And I heard rumors that the railroad might reconsider the Millbrook route now that the corruption's been cleaned out." "All very practical considerations," Callista observed with a smile. "Very practical," he agreed, pulling her closer. "Though I have to admit, I'm most looking forward to the impractical things, such as waking up every morning next to the woman who taught me that sometimes the most important law isn't written in any book. It's the one that says you stand up for what's right, no matter what it costs you. And what have I learned from my husband? I don't know." "What have you learned?" Callista was quiet for a moment, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "I've learned that sometimes the best adventures aren't the ones that take you far from home. They're the ones that help you build a home worth staying for." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the distant sounds of celebration still echoing from the town square. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were still reforms to implement, trust to rebuild, and a community to heal. But tonight was theirs. Kieran, Callista said softly, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't shot that rope? If you'd let the execution proceed?" Holt tightened his arms around her. "Every day an innocent man would have died. The real criminals would have gotten away with murder and theft. I never would have met the most remarkable woman in the territory, flatterer. Truth-teller, he corrected. Though I suppose that's part of my job description? She laughed. They sound like silver bells in the mountain air. Well then, Sheriff Holt, here's a truth for you. I love you more than all the books and all the libraries in all the world. That's a lot of love, Mrs. Holt. Good thing I have a lifetime to show you just how much, as the night deepened around. Them and Millbrook settled into peaceful sleep. Sheriff Kieran Holt reflected on the strange turns life could take. A month ago, he'd been a lonely lawman in a corrupt town, going through the motions of justice while real criminals operated with impunity. Tonight, he was a married man in a community reborn, surrounded by friends who'd proven that courage and integrity could triumph over greed and hatred. And it had all started with a single moment of moral clarity, the decision to cut a rope, rather than let an innocent man die. What are you thinking about? Callista asked, noticing his contemplative mood. Just wondering what tomorrow will bring. Whatever it is, she said, settling more comfortably against his shoulder, we'll face it together. Together, he agreed, and knew with absolute certainty that no matter what challenges lay ahead for Millbrook and Dee, there would be challenges they would meet them as a unified community, guided by justice, strengthened by love, and protected by the kind of courage that only comes from knowing you're fighting for something worth preserving. The sheriff had stopped the hangman, prevented an auction of human dignity, and in doing so, had found something far more valuable than he'd ever dared to hope for, a love worth living for, and a home worth defending. In the distance, a night bird called across the valley its song, carrying on the mountain wind like a promise of better days to come.